You're listening to the Sisterhood of Limitless Living podcast. I'm your host, Dr. April Moreno. I'm a public health specialist focused on integrative wellness and autoimmune living, supporting the community of women, where I help you to live your best quality of life through being your best self-advocate. Let's get started. Welcome to this episode of the Sisterhood of Limitless Living podcast. I'm your host, Dr. April Moreno. Happy summer. We are near the end of August now. We've been working on something for the past year. It's been something that's been a vision for the past several years, and it's really exciting that it's actually here. And I'm talking about our nonprofit organization. It's the Autoimmune Community Institute. And we are dedicated to health equity in autoimmune research, advocacy, and support. This organization is unusual, I think, compared to other advocacy organizations for the autoimmune community for a couple of reasons. Our intention is to hear the voices, to include individuals who have often been marginalized in the autoimmune space. And considering the fact that in the United States, we are approaching what they call minority-majority status around the country, this is not acceptable. It should never have been acceptable in the first place. The Autoimmune Community Institute is dedicated to diverse voices and inclusion in autoimmune research, experiences, sharing, patient communities, advocacy, getting the word out for health equity, understanding the different consequences, the different health impacts of the social determinants of health, and various other factors on diverse populations rather than one homogeneous population, as we've seen in over 95% of clinical trials. And we're also dedicated to support. So, for example, with the COVID-19 pandemic, some of our activities include protective gear for the immunocompromised and autoimmune communities around the country. If you'd like to learn more about us, we're at acicommunity.org. ACI, as in Autoimmune Community Institute. Community is the heart of our work. So today, I also just wanted to share the amazing news that we have reached over 3,000 downloads of this podcast, The Sisterhood of Limitless Living. So we've been around for just over a year now. We started in May of 2019, and it's been such a wonderful journey. It's been such a great opportunity to connect with women who are intentional, the way they choose to navigate and perceive their lives with chronic illness and autoimmune conditions. People who have decided to take control and be proactive on their path to living well. People who have actually even moved forward into helping others through sharing their story, through helping them with the gifts and the purposes that they have in their lives. It's been a beautiful journey, and it's been so inspiring just to see that it doesn't really matter what the circumstances are. If you are connected to your purpose, to learn from it and move forward, and you have this determined will, the sense of self-advocacy, self-efficacy, and self-will to move forward toward your life purpose, goals, and dreams. I've met so many amazing women on this journey, and I just wanted to share my thanks for all of you who make this podcast what it is. It's a journey of limitless living, and I am just so grateful for all of you who have been part of this experience, who have contributed as guests on the podcast, who have shared your expertise and gifts in the integrative wellness field, whether it be nutrition, psychology, mental health, mindfulness, guided imagery, visualization, Ayurveda, and other types of therapies. Thank you so much for helping to make the Sisterhood of Limitless Living a place of many amazing things coming from this space. So I'm very grateful for all of you. In this episode, we're speaking to someone who is part of the autoimmune community, who has many years of experience living as a patient advocate, a speaker in various patient communities, working with biotech as a patient advocate. And I'm really excited for her to share her story. She's lived with various chronic conditions over the past decades since she was a child. So she shares her experience of the challenges of getting the diagnosis and then how she made the decision to become a patient advocate. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Christine von Raesfeld. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Sisterhood of Limitless Living. Today we are talking to Christine von Raesfeld. She is a connector. She's a patient advocate and she's a CEO and co-founder of People with Empathy. She's here to talk to us about advocacy and what that looks like in the chronic illness and autoimmune space. So welcome, Christine.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here, April, and excited to give my perspective today. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Christine von Raesfeld. And like April mentioned, I am the CEO and founder of People with Empathy, but I am a patient first. So I have lived with chronic illness and rare disease from the time I was a child. I had my first surgery at the age of 5 and then continued on this long journey through healthcare. I like to tell people that my journey through healthcare is a series of unfortunate events and that anything that could go wrong did, but I survived. I persevered. And I'm now using those experiences of things that have gone wrong to share my perspective and see how we as an industry can get together to solve some of those problems that they may not think about. So I'm also, at 45 years old, I am one of the small percentage of under 65 living on Medicare and SSDI. So that's another issue. And insurance is always an issue. No husband that I am relying on for that. So it's trying to make my way through this world, on my own.
With chronic illness, there's so many factors and issues to address and discuss. So we could talk for hours, I'm sure, about all the different dynamics and things that we deal with. Tell us a little bit more about your experience, your autoimmune story. How was it that you were diagnosed at a young age? Some people don't get diagnosed at a young age. They're just like, you're too young for that, and they get ignored. Tell us about some of the challenging times you've experienced with chronic illness.
I would say my entire life has been a challenging time. We started out, like I said, at 5 years old with a rare condition called epiglottis that had occurred. And actually my father and my mom, they didn't even know what it was up until I found out what it was a few years ago. So I have been sick as a child and just went through mysterious symptoms all my life. I was always in constant pain. I have a mother who's an immigrant. She's Filipino, and she used to, not knowingly or not like on purpose, but would try to make me feel better. And when I would complain about pain, would say, it's okay. They're growing pains. It's your bones stretching. You're fine. So all of my symptoms that were happening were a lot of times dismissed by not only my family, but just everybody in general. So it was kind of this weird thing as a child, just knowing that something was wrong, but not really having anything happen. So at the age of 14, I was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder, which was TTP, thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura. And it was just a random fluke that they found out what it was. I was in the hospital. I was at 11,000 platelets and was on my deathbed. And they had basically told my parents to say goodbye. But just by chance, there was a hematologist oncologist on call that night who knew what was happening. And she said, this looks like TTP. Get a plasmapheresis nurse and let's start treatment. So at that time, it was also suggested that maybe I had lupus. And I had issues with my kidneys, and that actually became dismissed. And they said, no, she's got these other issues going on. It's a low-lying autoimmune condition. It'll be fine once we fix everything. And years of dealing with TTP and issues with everything else, and then finally having my spleen removed, that's when the lupus hit. And then it was full force. Everything was going wrong. And I think it was just a series, right? We had all of these signs, we had all of these symptoms, but nobody put anything together. And it wasn't until me fighting for myself, because, my mom was busy. She had 4 other kids. My dad was working full time. And I was kind of this teenager left in this weird space of I'm sick, but I don't want to be, but nobody's helping me. And what do I do? So it was a real struggle growing up and trying to find a place and find where I fit in and where I could get information. And back then, like I said, I'm 45. So no internet.
Right, there was no internet then.
Right, no internet. And so at 14, I was actually taking a bus to Stanford on my own and should not have been on a bus with a bleeding condition, but did anyways, and was looking for information on my own. And then what I found as I went on was I had to fight for my diagnoses. I had to struggle. And a lot of times I look fine and my labs look great and everything is in order, but something else is always wrong. And I think having a lupus diagnosis also kind of hurt me because there were other issues going on that now were dismissed because we had a diagnosis. So I think having a diagnosis to me at first was like so exciting, right? You don't know what's happening. You just want explanation. And then when you have a diagnosis, it's great. But then when things start going wrong beyond your diagnosis, then it's kind of like, what do you do? And then when you have doctors dismissing these things as normal to your disease, then you're kind of left even more in this weird conundrum. So years ago, I had gone through a period where I had hallucinations. I went through a psychotic break. I spent a year in bed. I don't remember any of it, but I did log everything on Facebook. So Facebook memories showed up a few years ago, and I'm now able to see that entire year. Wow. So it's this weird, interesting thing of, I thought it was the apocalypse. How funny with what we're going through now. And was posting to friends like it's the end of the world and this is happening and all on social media, because my thought mentality at the time was if I took pictures, if I wrote things down, that meant that it happened. And so I struggled with that for a long time. I was on treatments for it. I started to get better, but as I was getting better, I started to feel more side effects. And I kept telling my doctor, something's wrong. I don't feel right. I felt like I was watching my life through a camera. You know, it took me a long time to even figure out how to put that into words, but talking to another friend with autoimmune, we kind of clarified it to each other. And so I went back. My doctor said, labs look great. You look amazing. Go see your psychiatrist. And so like many of us with autoimmune, I did. And I went through a lot of therapy to find out that my therapist said, this is not my issue. And I would recommend going back to a neurologist. And so at the time I did. And they actually found out at that point that I now had toxic poisoning from one of the medications that I was using. And I had been telling people, screaming to people, and some of my Facebook posts from those years, when I go back, say, I need help. I don't know if I'm going crazy. I mean, just really interesting things that I don't even remember because of the state that I was in and just where I was at. But getting through all that and then finding out, and it was a fight, right? I knew something was wrong, but my labs look great. I look healthy. Now I'm losing weight again, and I'm in this weird, mysterious condition. I'm wearing a heart monitor, a little Zeo patch. And everybody's telling me how amazing I look. So my new response is, I always look my best on the brink of death. Right? It's that morbid sense of humor that you have to have as a patient, because what I realized growing up is that nobody wanted to hear me complain. My family, I grew up in an Asian family who didn't want people to know. And I have family members on my father's side who didn't even know. My godmother told me that she didn't even know I was in the hospital at 5 years old. It was just so hidden that you don't want anything to be wrong. And then through that whole process, you know, mental health is a huge issue of mine that I push and I promote. And my mental health, I have all these issues now because I thought, where were all these people? Where was the help when I needed it? And I struggle with a lot of these issues that I think, as someone growing up with illness, I think of things differently. I think of things more, not so much, I value time. I value time with people. I value conversations, things that people do for me, and not so much the material object and living up to people's images or how to portray yourself. And I did for a long time, up until my late 30s, where I hid out when I was sick. I disappeared. There's a period of my life where there are no photos of me because I was 220 pounds and I was embarrassed. now I look at that and I think, I wish I took more pictures, and not just to see where I've come and how far I've gone, but for the people around me and my nieces, they have no memories of that time.
I just realized, and this is something that I was thinking about for several months with this podcast, it has been really difficult to find Asian Americans, people of Asian descent, to come to this podcast. And I just realized that again. I mean, I am half Asian. And so you're the first other Asian American to be on this podcast. And so it's always trying to figure out why is it so hard to connect? I know there's a few people in the lupus community. I've been trying to reach out. I don't hear back. I saw someone who is Asian with MS. I don't hear back. And I think you've explained some of the reason why it's been really hard to find these people.
Because it is, right? You don't want to be different. You don't want to be known I'm known in the lupus space and the rare disease space, but it's interesting, right? My family doesn't like to admit anything's wrong. And it is very much that if I'm receiving an award or I'm being honored for something, they are right there next to me. But if it comes to talking about mental health or my disease, it's like, why are you telling everybody this? Like, what's wrong with you? You don't need to tell people this much information. Why are you doing this to yourself? You're putting yourself in a different situation. And I think that people automatically in our society feel like if you're sick, you're worth less, right? And I think growing up in an Asian culture, my grandmother was sick. We don't know what was wrong with her. We just know she was really sick, right? At the very end, she was going to the doctors, but it wasn't something anyone talked about. She was happy. She cooked. She wanted to make you happy, right? It wasn't ever about her. I don't think I ever heard her talk about anything that was wrong. And I honestly probably could have benefited, because I think her sisters now tell me she related to me so much because I reminded me of her, and just the spirit and it was illness, but you never saw it on her face. And that I had this special connection. And I thought, I wish I had that connection where she would have talked to me about it, or anyone talk about it, because I come out and I say these things, and I have family and friends say, why are you saying that? Don't say that. But then that one person that says it, I have 10 people who reach out and say, thank you for saying that. It's something I wanted to say. And I think so many people look at the positives or try to put out the positives of the disease, right? And I'm all about positive. I think I'm in this space because I went through these experiences. I had to. It was a sucky situation, but you grow and you learn from it. But I don't think other people are willing to do that. And that honesty with yourself and just knowing that it's okay to have these issues is what I think splits us up. And I think it's what mental health is the biggest part of all of these diseases, because you grow up in anything in the Asian culture. Even growing up as a teenager, I struggled with, do I let people know? Do I not tell them? What do I do? And how do I maneuver through life? Because as soon as you admit you're different, something's wrong with you. So I got that, and I hid out in my room for years, and I didn't have a social life. Even though I'm a very social person, it changed me to the core until I could really do work on myself and find out that I need to be okay with these things. And that regardless of how bad they were, something positive came out from it. But there are these negatives that have to be talked about, or it's going to keep happening for everyone else.
So there's so much stigma, as you mentioned, in the Asian community as it relates to, for example, mental health, for sure. Don't want to admit that you have a mental health condition to your family. They don't want to hear about it. Something's wrong with you, but it's not like something's wrong with you in that way. Something's wrong with you, like even saying it.
Yeah,
you're causing trouble. Something's wrong with you. That kind.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
Yeah.
And a lot are dismissed, I've found, in Asian communities. And I found even friends, Indian descent. I had a girl who told me, my mom does not want me to take the chemotherapy. She said, change my diet and, do these things and take these vitamins and I'll be okay. My dad likes to say, go to church. And I like to tell my dad, God can hear me wherever I am. And I'm more spiritual at this point anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this weird mix, right, of where you try to fit in and how your family sees finding answers. And it's definitely not finding answers publicly,
But yeah,
right?
how much
And
power it is when you do share your voice, you do share your story. How has sharing your story changed your life?
honestly, I think I've gotten to a point now where it's freed me. I'm 45, I'm single, I'm living on disability with a roommate, all of these things that people my age do not want to admit. But I think this is me and it's my situation. It's not my entire life, but it's a big part of it. It doesn't make me who I am, but it is very freeing to be able to tell someone that I have this disease and I don't care what you say and you don't live in my shoes and you haven't. And until you do, or until you hear my perspective, you cannot judge me. And I think it was sharing my story got me to a place where I was respected and looked at differently. But sharing my story in a way that was productive and not bringing me down more. I like to share my story with the problem and a possible solution that probably won't work because I don't know how legally all of this does, but to throw out something on, think about how you can come back and help me, and I find that a lot of patients live in this weird space of either you are angry that you're sick and you don't want to accept it, or you are sick and you want to be over it and you never want to talk about it again. And then there's the few of us that realize this is my life and I'm not getting away from it. And it's better for me now to accept it and to see what I can do with it and then progress from there. And my whole thing ended up that way, right? I have the toxic encephalopathy, I've got joint damage, I've got all of these mysterious conditions and diseases, but I do everything because I think whatever I'm going through, I went through it for a reason. And there's somebody else that's going to go through it after me. And at least if they have a few more resources or one more place where they can find an answer or just one tiny little bit of information that will help them, it will make their struggle a little bit easier. And for a while, it was psychological too. It was a feeling of, I felt like a burden.
And there are so many wonderful things about you. There's so much that you share with the world. There's so much that you
And now
give.
it was that I felt so long that I was a burden that I got involved in healthcare because I thought I'm a burden to everyone else. How can I help someone? In order to not feel like a burden and in order to feel like I was here for a reason. I think I struggled with the fact that I've been sick since I was a kid. I struggle with the fact that I look healthy and I am one of those, the invisible illness.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't understand invisible illness. They don't understand that I can be in pain and still smile. They don't understand that I can be depressed and happy at the same time. And they don't get this gray line that so many of us live in. Everything I've done, all of these experiences have just kind of, telling my story has really freed me. But again, it was I lived in that angry space for a long time. I lived in that space of shame and not wanting to share that I was even sick, right? I wanted to be normal in this world. And then I realized I don't want to be normal. I don't want the things that most people want. And I value the friendships and the conversations that I have with people in healthcare because a lot of them realize the real meaning of life. And I live in Silicon Valley. I do a lot of people watching at this place, Santana Row, it's the Rodeo Drive of Northern California. And it's interesting to me to sit far back with my mask and social distance and watch people live a life where they're trying to impress other people and to see people struggling to walk, but try not to show it. People getting annoyed when there's people walking in front of them too slow if they're young and they're thinking, God, this person needs to move, and they make a comment out loud and I see this look in someone's face and I'm thinking, she's struggling or he's struggling and no one even sees it. I look at someone's ankles when they walk by, because sometimes their ankles are swollen and it's like, oh, something's, and just little things that other people don't look at and don't see. And so I think just opening up, like admitting what you're going through, it is a completely freeing experience. And to know that, you know what, if somebody doesn't like me because of what I've gone through or where I am, it's probably not someone I need in my life anyways.
What advice would you give to somebody who is struggling and maybe they haven't felt free enough to share what they're going through? And sometimes to their own detriment, being able to get the care that they need, say that there's a pain that just doesn't go away. There's help that is out there, but in some way there's a being able to get the help that they need by not sharing their needs and their story so much that they're not able to express that feeling of being free. What kinds of advice would you give someone who is truly struggling with anger, denial, the stigma of chronic illness?
So I think first is to come to terms with that you do have a new normal. And I know everybody hates that term, especially now in COVID, right? But it is. I think it's going through the 5 stages of grief and knowing that you're going to go through them, knowing that it's okay to be angry at certain times, right? It's okay to have moments where you're going to crash and burn and cry yourself to sleep, right? There were so many nights and days where I'd cry in the shower because that's where nobody's going to see it. And I think I reached out and went to a support group for the first time. And I honestly struggle with support groups just because I feel that they're not really there for what they need to be, right? And so I went to a couple of support groups. I met some amazing people. And the support group started to get to be too much. In certain ones, it's more negative in spaces. And a lot of people who run support groups, some of them don't know how to moderate. And it's not of any fault of their own. They're trying to connect and they want to bring people together. But they also, don't know how to keep that flowing. And so the support group space to me became kind of negative. And so for me, it was a matter of, yes, I did go to a support group. I found some amazing people at a support group. And then I took those people and we did our own thing and we had a social group. And instead of sitting around an office talking about what happened in our disease, we now went to bars and clubs and bowling and out to dinner and sometimes just watched movies at someone's house. And so I think what saved me was my community. It wasn't until I actually reached out and found people that were going through the same things as me that I finally felt comfortable enough to be who I was. And so I think we all try to live in this normal world and fit into this normal world thinking that everyone is normal, not realizing that everybody has their own issues and that most of these people's issues are actually the same as yours. And so I did struggle a lot too with disease spaces, right? My nonprofit is People with Empathy, and I don't want to focus on one disease because I think I have all of these diseases. I don't want to say I just have lupus and dismiss every other symptom and every other condition that I have, because how do I know they're not connected? How do I know I wasn't misdiagnosed with lupus? And then I'm building this relationship with only this community. And what happens when I'm not part of that community anymore? Or what happens when I start to feel better and my symptoms aren't related to that disease anymore? Who do I go to? To me, it's all about finding the right people. And I have a lot of people that watched me on social media for a long time before they reached out. And so I recommend that. Find social media influencers that you like, that you feel like you can relate to. See what they're doing, see what they're talking about. Find people in your area. Because what I think is the most important is having someone there that gets it, that you can say when someone says, a friend of mine and I, we have conversations and we always ask, hey, how are you? And it's like, oh, I'm fine. And then she's like, oh, wait, I forgot who I'm talking to. My life sucks right now. And to have that. And I think even industry looks at it as they want to find solutions for us, but they want to bring us apps and technology and all of these things. And all I keep telling industry is that's all great and it's fine. But if your app can't bring me a community, if when I am laying in my bed, passive suicidal, and I say passive because I've never tried, and if I say suicidal, someone's going to come knock at my door. But when I have those thoughts and your app goes off and wants me to log how I'm feeling, I'm not going to do it.
You need to log in first with your password.
Right. And I don't even remember those. I have brain issues. So it's this interesting mix. But it is, I think it was finding the people that I connected with. And even in healthcare, there's people that don't always have the best interests. And I go off people's vibes. I know by the way you look at me, by the way, when I say I'm a patient, to see in your eyes that sometimes it's like, oh, and it's that pity look. All of a sudden, right? It's like, oh. And so I start some of my talks with the difference between sympathy and empathy, because I tell people, like, my story with healthcare is messed up and it's horrible, but I don't want you to feel sorry for me, because I have this amazing life that came out of it, and these amazing people who are now my chosen family, amazing connections of people who are there to empower you and uplift you. And I think it's finding those right people. I think you need to find the positive influencers and those people that have been through the rough times and aren't living in the rough times, that you can go to them and you can say, this happened to me today, but then you can laugh about it, right? We're connected on a different level. So I think the other key is knowing who you're talking to, and being able to mirror them and communicate with them in a way that you both need to communicate. And I think that being open and honest about what you need, and if somebody can't provide that to you, it's okay. They're just not your person. They're not your circle. Find your circle, find those people that you relate to, and go to that circle and go to people that you admire, right? And that you want to be like. Connection, I think, is what will help you get through all of this, and not making it all about your disease, right? You don't have to have a disease and be that disease. You can have that disease, you can live with it, you can coexist with it, but you also have a normal life, and you also go out and do things. And when you feel good, get out. Part of that social group that I had, it wasn't about once a month meetings. It was, you feel good tonight? Let me find a bunch of people to come out with you, because that barely happened, right?
We had to reschedule, didn't we, the other day?
Did,
because I woke up and I was not feeling well. I had no energy. It was a fatigue.
Right? You couldn't sleep the night before, and it was totally fine with me. And it's because we get each other and we have that perspective and that connection and that honesty with yourself. You're out here talking about these things and making a difference and really, connecting people. And it's messages that people need to hear, because I felt so alone for so long. And I'm 45 years old. And I tell one of my friends, her name's Whitney Carter. She's a patient advocate in the lupus and rare disease space. She's my medical twin. We have all the same weird, ultra rare diseases.
Wow.
Yeah. But her and we connect on this different level, right? And she's so much younger. But I look at her and I think, if I had the freedom that I have now, that she has now, at 21 years old, the things I could have accomplished, but I chose to hide it. I chose to live this into society and struggled, really struggled mentally, physically, everything, right? Fighting for just my voice being heard. And I think part of the reason I'm so loud now is because for so long I was so silent. And I always tell people, I'm not angry. I'm just passionate. Because some people take it as that. And I'm like, I'm not angry. I'm passionate. I'm on the same page as you. I just really have a passion for making sure people speak out and really empower each other. Things come about and opportunities come about when you're happy and you're excited for your friends and you're uplifting them, and then they get to another level. And then you automatically are all at this other level that you never thought you could be at. And I think the other thing is checking in on each other. Just a phone call every once in a while. I disappear. I have a habit of doing that sometimes when I get stuck in a depression or in a mode where I have way too much to do and I'm focused. Mm-hmm. But I do have people call and they're like, okay, I see you on social media, so I know you're not dead. And I'm just checking in to say, we miss you. That connection, and that's what helped me the most, is those people It's not ever going to be an app or a doctor or a clinical trial or any of it. It's going to be people. I think we need to refocus on that, right? And how we can help each other.
I was thinking about this, like with the podcast, how many people I've met over the past year interviewing for this. Like, it's very specific. You know, the people that I invite to this podcast have to have a certain perspective on their disease, on their life. And it's been wonderful. If you need help and support in trying to find people to reach out to or look up to or learn from, just listen in on some of the others, including Christine, that we've interviewed in this podcast, because you will find amazing, powerful people here who are able to see joy and purpose despite any of their health symptoms. It's one aspect of who we are, but we are so many other things as well, so many wonderful things.
Right. Even the word community, though, it's funny. I struggle with that word community, right? Can I bring it up really quick on? Yeah. So recently, I just started living in a retirement mobile home park, and it's somewhere I never thought I'd be growing up. But it's interesting because I came from a family that was a very political family and all this stuff. And you know, and you talk about community. You talk about community as your neighborhood and where you live in the area. And I live in a great community. It's safe, right? And it wasn't until I moved into this mobile home park with senior citizens. I am now the youngest person here. But it wasn't until I moved in here where I realized that community here is more like community in the disease space. Community here is the neighbors outside on their porch talking to each other when they walk by. It's people walking their dogs and knowing the dogs' names. And even if they're nosy, everybody knows what happens in this community. And they're friendly. And my neighbor across the way, they bring food over and put it on our porch for me sometimes. And I feel like I didn't know that that's really what community should be until I became older and really found that in the disease spaces that I lived in. But in a community, when I lived in a community at home and at school, it was a community where I didn't know my neighbors and I didn't talk to them. And I don't know, if I scream in the middle of the night, is someone going to come help me, or are they just gonna pretend they didn't hear it and go on with their lives because they don't want to be involved in someone else's drama? So it's an interesting, the community word is such a
accidental community.
Right? And I think community to me is more so what the rare disease and what the chronic illness community is. And I think it should be redefined that you can't call community where you live. That's your location, that's your city, that's your whatever, but that's not a community unless you are actively involved in there.
Right. That's true.
I don't know. There's a whole lot though when it comes to wording, right?
Definitely. No, that's a really good point. I agree with that. So how can we get in touch with you if we want to connect with you? We want to see you as an influencer in the chronic illness space. And how can we find you and your organization on social media, online?
So I'm everywhere. You can look for me by my name, Christine von Raesfeld. I am on Facebook. I have my own personal advocacy page. So you'll find Christine von Raesfeld, Patient Advocate. You will also find People with Empathy. We have a page there. I am on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. My nonprofit and I are both on Twitter. And if I can throw in a quick shout out, I'm also going to be featured in a documentary being made by a friend of mine who did some films for Stanford MedX. He's part of the MedX whole thing, and he worked with Inspire on doing some videos. But he's making a series called Prescription Social Media, which is following the lives of patient advocates trying to make change through social media. So that also has a page on Facebook, Prescription Social Media, and will be on there, and also some other amazing advocates that you'll be able to find in his series who are dealing with chronic illness and who are navigating this healthcare space.
Thank you so much. Isn't she amazing? Christine von Raesfeld. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really energized and touched by your energy, your optimism, your strength, and your power of your story, your power of sharing your story.
And thank you for the opportunity and giving the opportunity to so many people to do this, because just by doing that, you're opening that door for everyone else to start sharing. So Really appreciate it and love the conversations with you. So we're going to do it again.
Yes, we will. We're going to do another one. I already have it in mind. Thank you.
Talk to you soon, April.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sisterhood of Limitless Living podcast, Season 2. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Look forward to having you join us in upcoming episodes as well, where we continue to talk about integrative wellness and autoimmune living our best lives, being our own best advocates. Feel free to subscribe on iTunes to the podcast, and we are also available on several other locations as well. For more information about Dr. April Moreno, you can visit aprilmorenophd.com. Take care.